Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's lunch break lecture at Morris-Jumel Mansion. My name is Megan Burns. I'm the programs manager here at the mansion, and we are going to get started momentarily. Okay. Daniella, would you like me to put the slide up first, or would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Daniella, and I am an educator at Morris-Jumel Mansion. They are bringing us today's lunchbox lecture. The topic is Roots and Roses. We're going to do some fun history and nature travels through the historic Morris-Jumel neighborhood, which encompasses Washington Heights, and we'll be going down into West Harlem as well. Thanks for everyone for coming.
And I'm going to get our PowerPoint up and ready. Let's see. There we go. Okay, wonderful. All right, so before Daniella gets started with her presentation, again, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank them for joining us today for our afternoon lunch break lecture at Morris-Jumel Mansion. Again, my name is Megan Burns. I'm the programs manager at the mansion, and I will also be giving everyone an overview of today's program, how it's going to work, some of the technological capabilities, and I will be monitoring the chat. But first, a little bit about our new lunch break lecture series. So this virtual program was designed to create an opportunity to highlight some of the unique aspects of Morris-Jumel Mansion's museum shown here. Each lecture, someone from MJM, so today that's you, Daniella, choose an aspect of the mansion's history that really captivates them and shares a brief overview with all of you. Before Daniella begins her talk, again, I just want to review a few of our guidelines for Zoom today. So first things first, Daniella is going to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes with a few pauses for audience questions from the chat. At the end of her presentation, we will reconvene for 5 to 10 minutes for a larger general Q&A session. Also, if you notice on your slide as well, we will be recording today's lecture. So if you do not wish to be recorded, you may either leave the lecture at any time or use the Zoom navigation menu located at the bottom of your screen to turn off your video. If you choose to stay in, if you choose to keep your video on, just note that you are giving your consent to be recorded. Also, some of you may have realized that as you came into this space that you were automatically muted. And that is going to be the default for Daniella's presentation. However, if you want, again, if you'd like to share questions or comments, please use the chat box. You can see it's located at the bottom navigation bar right in the center. At the end of the talk, you'll also have the option of raising your digital hand under the reaction tab, again, located at the bottom of the screen. And if you raise your virtual hand, when we call on you, you will need to accept the ability to unmute. Okay? All right, let's begin. Daniella, take it away.
All right, thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me here today. Just on a personal note, I want to thank you all for coming. And if you have to leave the meeting at any time, that's actually fine. We will have an email follow-up with you that will give you some references and some of the websites and locations that we talked about today. So thanks again, and we're starting our tour. I'm highlighting today not only the historic Morris-Jumel neighborhood, but the Heritage Rose District, which is the United States' only Rose District, and it was founded by the nonprofit Heritage Rose organization in 2009. You'll see a map later on, but we're starting at the northernmost part, which happens to be at the Morris-Jumel Mansion, which is a stop on the Heritage Rose Tour. And you can see on your screen, this is a lovely etching of the Morris-Jumel Mansion, which was built as a colonial home in 1765. You'll see Colonel Roger Morris there on the left-hand side of your screen, and his wife, Mary Phillips Morris. So they actually were loyalists to the crown. So when the stirrings of the revolution broke out, they left the mansion just 10 years later in 1765. So that's how we get the first part of the name. They're the Morris family.
Yep.
So we have the second half of our name here. Again, we're at the Morris-Jumel Mansion, and one of the most famous residents was Eliza Jumel. You can see her portrait, which hangs inside the mansion today. So Eliza moved in 1810, and she spent the rest of her life there until she passed away in 1865. She is a central figure. She was the longest resident, and she's responsible for a lot of the decorative elements. And you'll see the inside of the mansion if you haven't had a chance to visit. You'll see the inside in other lunch break lectures, and also when the museum reopens to the public. So her first husband was Stephen Jumel. They both moved into the mansion in 1810. And after he passed away, her second husband was Aaron Burr. So we know him as a historical and notorious figure in American history. He was one of our founding fathers, but perhaps he is most famous for his duel with Alexander Hamilton. So if we could just go back to that slide, I just want to point out his portrait, which is on the left. That's the portrait of Aaron Burr right there. And for purposes of today's lecture, you can actually see in this picture, Eliza Jumel is holding roses. So they were both rose collectors, both Aaron Burr and Eliza Jumel. And as it says in the caption, they were married inside the mansion in the French parlor in 1833. So moving ahead, we have a receipt actually that is from a purchase that Aaron Burr made in New York City in 1795. So I think it's very interesting to see these handwritten records, and unfortunately it's a little pixelated at this time, but you can see in the left-hand column, this is actually what he purchased. So he purchased primroses, a pot of daisies, and 2 pots of white hyacinths. So we're jumping ahead a bit in history because I wanted to show you these beautiful print ads from a very famous rose vendor. So these print ads that you see in front of you are from the Peter Henderson Seed and Catalog Company. So that early receipt that we were lucky enough to see, courtesy of the Heritage Rose District, really precedes this. Roses gained a lot of popularity in New York City during the Victorian era and the mid-1800s. So you can see in these ads that their address for the Peter Henderson Company, that they were actually located downtown right here in New York City at 35 and 37 Cortlandt Street. So Peter Henderson founded this business in the 1840s, and it gained popularity mostly because he was the first one to do these 5-color lithograph catalogs. And the business went on for 100 years. That's his seed business and his catalog business. He authored many books, and his family, I guess they're 4 generations, and they still maintain horticulturalism and their authorities on gardening. So I'm inside the mansion now, and I'm looking out at Roger Morris Park, which is the first stop, as I mentioned, on our Heritage Rose Tour. I took this picture on a rainy and foggy day last spring. I'm looking out from inside what is the former library of the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And even though it's rainy and foggy, you can see that I'm looking out on this beautiful magnolia tree that that bloomed early on this spring. So I'm going to go, actually looking outside on Roger Morris Park, I'm going to go to the right, and I'm going to present our next view. Now I'm outside. The park itself is part of the New York City Parks Department, and it is 1.5 acres. It was much, much larger in the time of the Morrises and the Jumels, but we still have this beautiful 1.5 acre park to enjoy as part of the mansion grounds. This is a close-up of some of our heritage roses, which I should say heritage roses comes because they have a certain pedigree, a certain history. Most of them are English roses or Dutch roses originally, and they can be traced back to the 1700s, and they're known for having a specific genetic component. So we can see the mansion in the background. I highlighted the name of this blogger who will also be included in your reference list because he takes some beautiful pictures of the neighborhood and he does identify various roses and other plants that he photographs in the neighborhood. And here we are going back a little bit and we look at another beautiful rose shrub. You can see the Octagon room, and I mentioned the Octagon room. It was actually an impressive garden room of the time, and it was one of the first Octagon rooms in the colonies. And now I've gone around at a 180-degree view, and I'm looking out at the back part of the mansion. So we're going to be going after this into the Colonial Revival Garden. And we see this nice frame. You can get an idea of just how many trees comprise Roger Morris Park. This is just a small sampling. And we have one of our community cats, also named Eliza, after Eliza Jumel. He's in the left-hand corner, and I'll talk a little more about our community cats later. But let's go on to the Colonial Revival Garden. So here we are. Now we're in the back view. We're looking at the mansion from the back of the buildings. And we're in this garden that, you know, doesn't look so great right now. I took this picture back in 2018 on another drab day sort of towards the end of winter and spring. So you can see that it's a sunken garden, but there's a lot of landscaping that needs to be done. We're focused on the sundial, but it has a lot of potential, right? So here we are bringing the garden to life, and we do that with a combined effort and really with, you know, community help with all the dedication of the various communities that embrace the Morris-Jumel Mansion and Roger Morris Park. So I'm looking out, you can see these volunteers breaking the garden. You can see the garden gazebo in the back, that sundial still in the middle. And this right here specifically is an event that is held early in the spring by the Heritage Rose Foundation. Again, they're a nonprofit that were established in 2009. So each year they hold an annual Heritage Rose Day event. Volunteers come from the neighborhood, and not only do they learn about planting and maintaining roses, but there's also a rose giveaway. So they get rose bushes to take home as well. And there's another volunteer garden day, which occurs on the first Sunday of each month with the New York City Parks Department. I will note at this time that even though New York City parks are allowed to be open, our park is presently not open as it is on the grounds of a historic house, which are presently closed under New York state law. But we have these nice pictures, and this group right here on the left, I'm told, was the last group of garden volunteers to come. This looks like it is sometime in early March or February, and they have their rakes and they brought their enthusiasm to help us maintain and beautify the garden. And as you can see, children love to participate in this event as well, and here they are standing in front of a New York City Parks vehicle. These are pansies that are on the back porch. I took these pictures as well. So when we have these opportunities for the community to come and garden with us in Roger Morris Park, they're given these pansies as well to put on the planters that flank the mansion. And sometimes there are pansy giveaways as well. And that in normal times happens on the first Sunday of each month in Roger Morris Park. I have some pictures here to show you. As you can see, the grounds actually look beautiful year round. There are lots of varieties of plants, not just roses, but we have beautiful daffodils, daisies as well. There's many different species of trees. And specifically in this picture, we've come around the side of the house now. We're almost at the front entrance again. Specifically in this picture, as you can see at the front entrance of the mansion, there are rose bushes right to the right to greet the guests as they come up the stairway and enter the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So now I've done my 360-degree circling of the property, and I'm going to leave Roger Morris Park. And I am greeted again by Eliza, the cat, which we're also told is male. He's one of our community cats that hangs out and guards the property and lives on Sylvan Terrace, where we'll be heading now. So Eliza, the cat, is ushering you into Sylvan Terrace. Now, Sylvan Terrace is the pathway to the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So it's an incredible street of 1880s carriage houses. There's 20 of them. They've been beautifully restored and maintained. That was an initiative that took place in the 1970s. So when you walk down Sylvan Terrace, you're actually at the subway on 161st Street. And in that area, that's where Amsterdam Avenue and St. Nicholas intersect at that point. So you're actually going from modern times, ascending this staircase right onto Sylvan Terrace, and you're walking a cobblestone pathway made of Belgian bricks right up to the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And these community cats that you see live, this is the one on the left, is right in front of his or her home. And this door is kept open for them. So they're on the streets in their own part of the natural landscape, guardians of the street. And you can see these two little cuties on the right. They look like they're taking their guardianship of Sylvan Terrace very seriously. So we're going to leave Sylvan Terrace, and as I said, the Heritage Rose District map, which you'll be able to see later on in the presentation, is actually comprised of a very large district. So we're actually going to be going from 163rd Street to 122nd Street if we were to walk the entire scope of the district. But I'm veering slightly northward right now, and I'm going to 163rd Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. So I'm just doing a slight northward right away from the mansion. And we are looking at this tree called the dinosaur. And this tree is about 300 years old. And you know how it works in Manhattan. There's always competition for, who had the first slice of pizza, and, what is the oldest this, there's Ray's Pizza, famous original Ray's, all of this. Well, this tree is in competition in Manhattan to be the oldest tree in the borough. The Parks Department has a section called Great Trees of NYC. And this is a great tree of the borough of Manhattan. It was so named the dinosaur because it was considered old in Revolutionary War times. The legend has it, I will repeat this legend because when you Google that tree, every story of this comes up, that George Washington himself took shelter under the tree in 1776 and watched the Battle of Washington Heights. So that info is everywhere. It is an English elm. There's another English elm that could be about the same age, known as the Hangman, and that is in Washington Square Park. So it's an incredible 80-foot tall tree with a 60-inch base. That's actually the entire trunk, sorry, is 60 inches in diameter. And when you visit the Morris-Jumel Mansion one day in person, you'll see that George Washington actually famously stayed at the mansion in the fall of 1776 for about 6 weeks. So now we're moving along on our tour, and we are visiting Trinity Cemetery. And so I've walked southward, and I am on West 53rd Street. And the scope of Trinity Cemetery encompasses Amsterdam Avenue and Riverside Drive from West 153rd Street to West 155th Street. So some of you may know Trinity Church, located by Wall Street in downtown Manhattan. So they needed to expand their cemetery, actually. They had been using it as a burial ground from the mid-1600s through the 1800s. So they ran out of space to inter people, and they acquired this property in 1842. So this is open to the public, and this is filled with beautiful heritage roses planted by the Heritage Rose Foundation. Now you're seeing two archways here. There are other stops in the cemetery, like all New York City cemeteries of note. This has some famous residents, eternal residents in it. There's a mausoleum to James Audubon, who is the most famous naturist maybe that we know, or naturist. And I wanted to, actually I'll be using some terms, and I wanted to differentiate. Naturist is someone who studies animals, plants, and fungi. Naturist has an alternate definition of nudist, but in this case we are talking about James Audubon, and the famous Audubon district is actually included in this part of Washington Heights. So we're going through the cemetery here, and also Eliza Jumel, her tomb is here, and this part of Trinity Cemetery, the entire place was actually landscaped and designed by James Renwick, famous architectural designer, and you might know his name from being the designer of St. Patrick's Cathedral. So there are a few varieties of roses that are included in our Heritage Rose District. And later on, you'll see a list of these varieties of roses. And if you are a rosarian, you might be able to identify some of them. And I want to clarify that a rosarian is a person who cultivates roses. So they grow their own roses. But a rosarian especially cultivates roses as an occupation. So one of the roses that were brought here to our Heritage Rose District in 2009 is called the Puerto Rico Rose. Not surprisingly, the official name is Rosa Puerto Rico. And it was brought to Washington Heights from Puerto Rico to honor the neighborhood connection to Caribbean communities. And we have another rose that was actually created for our district, and it is called the Harlem Rose. And it was a new rose created in France just for our district. And the creation of roses comes actually from people who have saved either original seeds, or they can also grow them on other plants as a host and transport them to other areas. So I think it's great and interesting to note that not only did the community come together and these different organizations to host these heritage roses, but growers from all around the country, and as you can see, places as far as France, also grew these roses of their own accord and had them actually brought to our Heritage Rose District. So here's a map, and I know it's a little bit hard for you to see in your screen, but this is actually going to be included in your materials, and it talks about where we just visited. So I'm pointing to the upper part of 163rd Street, as you can see, is where we started off. As I said, the Morris-Jumel Mansion is the northernmost stop on the Heritage Rose District. We went slightly north to visit the dinosaur, the dinosaur in competition for being Manhattan's oldest tree. And then we went south to Trinity Cemetery. So some of the other highlights that you can visit, them. If you live in the neighborhood, it's great to walk around and see these spaces and to just see what's open. But I will say that the intention of the Heritage Rose District was for the public to appreciate these roses. So they are not isolated from us. These grow in community parks and parks that are officially part of the New York City Parks Department, like our park, the Roger Morris Park. So there are stops on this tour like Maggie's Garden, which is a community garden, the Hispanic Society and Museum, which is part of Puerto Rico College, is a stop on the Heritage Rose District. There is the Harlem Senior Sculpture Center, which is a stop on the Heritage Rose walking tour. And it's up to you. You can go all the way down to 122nd Street from 163rd Street with this tour. They're accessible if you don't, I just want to add, sorry, this one thing, just this one little part. They're accessible if you don't want to stop into all of these places, or, if some live behind a gate at this point, due to the present restrictions in New York City. There's something called a Broadway Mall. So if you see, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, that is number 6. The Broadway Mall, these roses were just planted in medians in the middle of Broadway. And the point is to always to protect them. So they're protected from our feet. They're protected from the elements, things like road salts that we use that can, you know, poison plants and inhibit their growth. So it's just, it can be, to see some of these roses can be as easy as stepping out onto Broadway and encountering them as you're crossing the street. So I actually did not take a break to do questions. I just realized that, and I don't, I didn't have the program director queued up in my slides. So but I just, I'm muted. Hold on. Let's see. I'm unmuted. Okay.
Okay, you're back.
I'm back. I was muted by the host. Now I'm unmuted. So I'm sorry about not pausing for questions, but I mean, the dinosaur tree is pretty exciting, and I think I just got a little wound up there. So I'm going to actually conclude in a couple of minutes, and I want to thank you, and I'm really interested in hearing your questions and hopefully being of some help to answer them. But let me talk about what's coming up for our upcoming lunch break lectures. So as you can see in the slideshow, there are 2 lectures that are concluding the month of June, and one is this Saturday, June 20, not the, is it the Saturday? Yes. June 27th at 1 p.m. The mansion, aside from being the oldest house in Manhattan, also is sometimes referred to as Manhattan's oldest haunt. So if you're interested in paranormal history, that will be the topic of the next Lunchbox lecture. And then following just 2 days later, on the 29th, you'll be inside the mansion taking a closer look at some of the portraiture. And those figure in with some of the historical figures that I talked about, the portraits of Aaron Burr and the longest resident of the house, Eliza Jumel. There is going to be upcoming events for us as well in July that live virtually online, of course, at the moment, but there are photos from last year's summer garden camp. You can see the volunteers inside teaching children about the types of herbs that are grown in our colonial revival garden way back then and still to this day. This picture is of the colonial kitchen, which is in the basement of the mansion. And then they're outside in the colonial revival garden as well. This is happening virtually in July in 2 segments as part of the Uptown Arts and Culture Camp. So you can either sign up for our email list or you can check the events tab at the Morris-Jumel Mansion's website. So I want to show you some of those links right now. Of course, you can visit us at www.morrisjumel.org. The contact email is publicprograms@morrisjumel.org, and you can follow us on social media. Instagram and Twitter is @morrisjumel, and Facebook is Morris-Jumel Mansion.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Daniella, for that fascinating presentation. And people have been asking a few questions in the chat that I've been addressing kind of as we went along about whether or not we have a shop, do we have plants there? We have garden-related items as well as books that talk a little bit about the surrounding landscape, but no plants as of yet. And then there were a few questions about Sylvan Terrace, about the buildings and who's there.
Sure. So those are buildings that are for sale. They come up every occasion on the market. You can look at real estate websites like StreetEasy, and they are restored to their wooden glory in the 1970s. The back of them still have aluminum siding, but those are residents, and they come often to, they're part of the community. They come often to our events at the mansion. Some of them might volunteer. I have not been lucky enough to see the inside, but sometimes people will leave a doorway open on that first level or at the actual ground level, and I've gotten to peer inside. But maybe if you know somebody, you can invite me for a little non-invasive peek someday. They were originally, and the other thing is they were originally, it's a horse carriage path, and they were for working class New Yorkers. They were built in the 1880s for, members of the working class.
All right, great. Does anyone else have any additional questions? So far, everybody in the chat has been saying, thank you, you rock. Thank you very much. Leanne wishes she could afford to live in one of the row houses. Me too. And a few people are thanking you for bringing up the Heritage Rose District as something new that they can do in New York City that they weren't aware of. So.
And yeah, I mean, it's something great. I actually, I'm really looking forward to getting out and exploring. I love that it's made in mind with accessibility to the public. You know, these are in front gardens, community spaces, parks, community gardens. So they're not hidden from us. They're meant to be enjoyed and preserved. And there's a couple of things I wanted to clarify as well. Our state flower is the rose, our state flower of New York City. And we already talked about rosarian, someone who cultivates roses as an occupation. A horticulturist is an expert in garden cultivation and management. We talked about James Audubon being the famous naturist, but there's also a whole other aspect. Even if you just want to look at roses, or you're your apartment gardener like me. This is my book from the 70s, The Apartment Gardener. There is also something called floriology, and that is the language of flowers. So it encompasses all flowers, not just roses. And if you look more into floriology, you can figure out how lovers communicated with each other in Victorian times, and that just makes for fascinating reading.
I think that might be part 2 to this lunch
Floriology,
break lecture talk,
2.
you know?
Floriology part 2.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank all of you. Thank you, Daniella, for taking on this virtual flower walk. I hope all of you enjoyed the presentation. I'll be following up with you via email with some links to additional resources and information about upcoming virtual programs at the mansion. So thank you all again. Have a great day.